Throughout history, cultures around the world have told tales of terrifying and awe-inspiring creatures, monsters that lurk in the shadows, guard sacred places, or challenge the bravest of heroes. From the fire-breathing dragons of Europe to the shape-shifting yoki of Japan, these mythical beasts embody the fears, beliefs, and imaginations of their people. This series will explore some of the most legendary monsters of mythology, uncovering their origins, powers, and the stories that keep them alive to this day. Welcome to Myth and Lores, a journey into the dark and divine. Without further ado, let's jump into another lore. Anansi the Spider is one of the most iconic figures in African folklore, particularly among the Akan people of Ghana. However, stories about him spread across many African cultures and the Caribbean. He is a trickster god, both clever and deceptive, and his tales often explore themes of wisdom, power, greed, and mischief. While Anansi is generally depicted as a mischievous character with a love for trickery, some of the darker aspects of his lore revolve around his willingness to deceive, manipulate, and even sacrifice others for his gain. Here are some of the darker tales and aspects of Anansi's mythos. Anansi and the creation of the world. In some versions of the creation myth, Anansi plays a central role in shaping the world. In one such tale, Anansi was initially tasked with bringing wisdom to the world. He was gifted with the knowledge of taming the forces of chaos and order in the universe, but he soon became overwhelmed by his desire to control everything. Rather than sharing his wisdom with the people, he hid it all in a small gourd and tried to keep it for himself. However, his arrogance thwarted his plans. As a child, tricked him into revealing the wisdom, thus allowing the world to be appropriately shaped and balanced. This myth reflects Anansi's dark side, his selfishness and manipulation, and his inevitable downfall due to his hubris. It also emphasizes that wisdom and power are not meant to be hoarded but shared. Anansi and the Sky God. One of Anansi's most well-known stories involves his dealing with Nyame, the Sky God. In this tale, Anansi seeks to acquire the title of King of all stories and attempts to bargain with Nyame for the right to own all the stories in the world. Nyame, in turn, challenges Anansi with a series of impossible tasks, such as capturing a certain number of creatures and bringing them to him. These creatures included hornets, the python, and a giant spider. In his quest to complete the task, Anansi resorts to cunning and deceit, tricking the creatures and sometimes sacrificing others to achieve his goals. While he succeeds, the story shows Anansi as being willing to manipulate and harm others to achieve his ambitions. His victory is hollow, suggesting that the actual cost of power is often the moral corruption that comes with it. Anansi and the death of his own family. In some darker versions of Anansi's stories, his trickster behavior is shown to have tragic consequences for those around him, including his own family. One such story involves Anansi sacrificing his children to gain something for himself, whether it is wisdom, riches, or power. Anansi's carelessness and manipulations often lead to the ruin or loss of his loved ones, underscoring a key theme of many Anansi tales. While trickery may win battles, it often leads to moral and emotional destruction. Anansi is also sometimes portrayed as a figure who seeks to hoard wealth and power, often at the expense of others. In one tale, Anansi tricks a group of animals into giving him a share of their food or labor by outsmarting them, only later to betray them. This betrayal highlights Anansi's greed and moral ambiguity, suggesting that his desire for more never ends and he often exploits those who trust him. Anansi and the Devil. In some tales, Anansi interacts with malevolent figures like the devil, embodying an even darker side of his nature. One story tells of Anansi making a deal with the devil to gain great power, but in the end, Anansi uses his wit to outsmart the devil, turning the situation in his favor. These stories reflect Anansi's ability to play with dangerous forces, often at the risk of others, and even the devil himself isn't immune to Anansi's trickery. However, the devil in these stories is not always a purely evil figure. Sometimes, the trickster and the devil are two sides of the same coin, representing chaos, desire, and the darker aspects of human nature. Anansi's suffering and downfall. Some stories emphasize that Anansi's tricks and manipulation lead to his ultimate suffering. Despite his intelligence and cunning, Anansi is sometimes portrayed as a character who cannot escape fate. One story tells of Anansi's downfall when he becomes too overconfident, and a trap set by a rival or even one of his children leads to his defeat. The end of such tales often involves Anansi learning that no matter how clever one is, deceit and trickery come with consequences, and eventually, the web of lies he spins will trap him. Anansi and the Rebellion of the Animals. Another dark tale comes from Anansi's relationship with the other creatures of the forest. In some versions of the folklore, Anansi is shown as a tyrant, ruling over the animals with a web of lies and manipulation. Eventually, the animals rebel against his rule, realizing that his promises of freedom and prosperity are deceitful. In these stories, Anansi's downfall is brought about by his inability to control those he has wronged. His kingdom collapses, leaving him with nothing, an empty, solitary figure forever bound in his own webs. Themes in the darker Anansi tales: greed and selfishness. Anansi is often portrayed as a character whose desires overpower his ethical compass. His need for control, power, and wealth drives him to make immoral decisions. The cost of trickery. While Anansi's cunning often wins him victories, it comes at a significant cost to his relationships, his integrity, and sometimes his own well-being. Deception and betrayal. Central to many Anansi tales is the idea of deception, where Anansi manipulates others for personal gain, showing how trickery can backfire or lead to unintended harm. The flaws of wisdom. Anansi's intelligence is his great strength and weakness. His knowledge, while powerful, is often used for self-serving purposes, demonstrating that wisdom in the wrong hands can be dangerous. The darker side of Anansi the Spider shows him as more than just a playful trickster. He symbolizes the dangers of unchecked power, selfishness, and the consequences of manipulation. His tales serve as cautionary stories about the consequences of greed, hubris, and betrayal, all wrapped in the guise of wit and cunning. In many ways, Anansi is not just a trickster. He is a reflection of the complexities of human nature, capable of both great wisdom and also great darkness. That concludes this lore. If you like what you heard, please like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next lore. Bye.